Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to take a journey, a really deep dive into more than 700 years of Swiss history. We're going to figure out how this small, pretty mountainous nation became this global symbol of peace and prosperity.
And it's a really good question, right? Because Switzerland's journey is so much more than just, mountains and banks. It's really a story about fierce independence, some really deep conflicts, and this incredible ability to somehow build consensus right out of division. So how on earth did they do it? Well, let's find out.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to break this epic story down into 6 parts. We'll kick things off with its ancient roots and legendary founding. Then we'll navigate through the messy parts, religious wars, foreign invasions, and finally, we'll see how the modern state was born and what its role is in the world today.
All right, let's dive into part 1. Our story actually starts way before Switzerland was even a word, in a place that's always been a crossroads for Europe's biggest cultures and empires.
You know, the land that we now call Switzerland was shaped by all these waves of settlement and conquest. It all started with Celtic tribes like the Helvetii. But then, in 58 BC, Julius Caesar and his legions showed up and brought the region into the Roman Empire. After Rome fell, it came under Frankish rule, and later it got folded into the huge Holy Roman Empire.
Now, here's a really crucial concept you need to get: Reichsfreiheit. Sounds complicated, but it's pretty simple. Certain regions, especially the ones that controlled those vital mountain passes in the Alps, got this special status. It basically meant they answered directly to the emperor himself, no local dukes or lords telling them what to do. So, you can imagine, when King Rudolf of Habsburg tried to take that status away in the late 13th century, well, that lit a fire of resistance.
And that resistance, it leads us straight into our next chapter, the creation of an alliance that would become the very foundation of the Switzerland we know today.
Okay, 1291. This is the legendary date. In August of that year, 3 forest cantons, that's Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden, they all came together. They were really worried about the power of the Habsburgs, especially after the emperor died. So they formed a defensive pact, a promise basically to stand together against anyone who tried to push them around. Now, this wasn't a declaration of independence just yet, but it was definitely the seed from which a nation was going to grow.
And boy, did that seed grow fast. By 1353, the alliance had ballooned to 8 cantons, and they proved they could fight, winning this huge, decisive victory against the Habsburgs at the Battle of Sempach. This battlefield success actually gave rise to the legendary Swiss mercenaries. These guys were so disciplined and skilled they were in high demand all over Europe. And then, after beating the Swabian League in 1499, the Confederacy was, for all intents and purposes, independent.
So, with the outside threats mostly handled, the Confederacy's biggest challenge was now going to come from the inside. There was this new idea sweeping across Europe, and it was one that would tear the Swiss cantons right apart.
And that idea, of course, was the Protestant Reformation. A guy named Huldrych Zwingli started it in Zurich, and pretty soon, big cities like Bern and Basel adopted the new faith. But the original, more rural cantons, they stayed staunchly Catholic. And this created a massive religious divide. I mean, they had separate political meetings and even fought 2 short but really brutal civil wars called the Kappeler Kriege.
But here's the crazy part, the great paradox of it all. While they were literally fighting each other over religion, the Swiss somehow managed to stay out of the 30 Years' War, a conflict that just devastated the rest of Europe. So by the time that war was over, everyone kind of saw Switzerland as this oasis of peace, and that led to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, which finally gave the Swiss Confederacy its formal legal independence from the Holy Roman Empire. It was official.
But that hard-won independence, well, it was about to face its biggest test yet, thanks to another revolutionary force, Napoleon Bonaparte. This next period of chaos, though, would be what ultimately forged the modern Swiss state.
So in 1798, the French army just rolls in and shatters centuries of Swiss tradition. They set up something called the Helvetic Republic, which was a centralized state, just like France. Now for the Swiss, who absolutely cherished their local freedom and their cantonal power, this was a total outrage. People hated it, and it led to a bunch of uprisings.
Right, so after Napoleon finally falls, all those old tensions come bubbling back to the surface. This time, it was conservative Catholic cantons versus the more liberal Protestant ones. But the fight wasn't just about religion anymore, it was about politics. The liberal cantons wanted a stronger, more centralized federal government, while the conservative ones fought to keep their local power. It all came to a head when 7 Catholic cantons formed their own separate alliance, the Sonderbund, and that sparked the very last war ever fought on Swiss soil.
And what happened next is just kind of remarkable. The Federal Army won, and won quickly. But instead of punishing the losers, what did they do? They invited them to the table to help write a brand new constitution. The result was the Swiss Federal Constitution of 1848, a true masterpiece of compromise. It created the modern federal state we see today, perfectly balancing national power with that treasured autonomy of the cantons.
Okay, so with its political house in order, Switzerland enters this whole new era. This is where it really cements its global identity as a neutral, industrial, and financial powerhouse.
Yeah, this whole period from the late 1800s to the 20th century, it's often called the Swiss miracle. Industrialization just takes off, and the country's official policy of neutrality, which was now written right into its constitution, allowed it to completely sidestep the devastation of 2 world wars. That stability turned Switzerland into a safe haven for money, and that laid the groundwork for its huge banking industry. It's what transformed it into one of the wealthiest nations on the planet.
But you know, that neutrality wasn't simple. It came at a cost and involved some really complex and frankly controversial choices. During World War II, Switzerland was completely surrounded by Axis powers. Survival meant making economic deals. The German Reichsbank sold 1.3 billion francs worth of gold to Swiss banks, and a lot of that gold was plundered from occupied countries. Germany got the hard currency it needed to fund its war machine in return.
So this really captures the incredibly delicate balancing act Switzerland had to perform. On one hand, they had a strong military deterrent, this Reduit plan to defend fortified positions deep in the Alps. On the other, they were making these controversial economic deals just to keep the country running. And then there's the humanitarian side. They took in around 300,000 refugees, but they also turned away thousands more at the border, all while their country was serving as a major hub for spies from both the Allies and the Axis.
All right, for our final chapter, let's look at how Switzerland has found its place in the post-war world, a world really defined by international cooperation and integration.
The post-war decades brought some pretty big changes. Women finally got the right to vote in federal elections in 1971. Pretty late, I know. A whole new canton, Jura, was peacefully created in 1979. And after debating it for decades, Switzerland finally joined the United Nations in 2002, and then the Schengen Agreement a few years later. It was a clear signal that they were ready to engage more with the world.
Still, its relationship with Europe is, well, it's unique. Switzerland has consistently voted to stay out of the European Union. They prefer a complex web of individual treaties instead of full political membership. And this desire to have the economic benefits without giving up their sovereignty, it creates constant tension, especially over things like immigration and the EU's principle of free movement. Which brings us right back to our big question. From that simple defensive pact back in 1291 to its modern, complicated balancing act, Swiss history has really been a masterclass in navigating a tough world. But in an age of global crises, and we saw this with their recent decision to adopt EU sanctions against Russia, can this centuries-old model of neutrality really hold up?
It's a huge question, and one that Switzerland is dealing with as we speak. Thanks so much for joining us on this historical journey. If you want to explore more, definitely check out our Concise Country Histories playlist. And hey, be sure to subscribe to The Explainer for more deep dives. We'll see you next time.